Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. Thanks to everyone for coming. I'm here today. I did my best to prepare a talk about a framework that has not been released yet, Angular 13. So this is my best effort. I hope everyone enjoys it. I'm going to take you through where I would learn some of this stuff and how you can start playing around with it too. So let's dive in. My name is Aaron. Everyone calls me Frosty, though. My last name is Frost. Ever since I was a kid, just Frosty. I don't know why. I like it, though, because there's too many Aarons in the world. So Frosty's great. Call me Frosty. I'm a Google developer expert, like they said. Starting when I started working with the Angular team with ngconf, I got nominated, and it's been an amazing thing. I don't think I could ever thank Google enough for letting me be part of the GDE community. I'm also with ngconf, like they said. We've been doing that for eight, almost 9 years now, and love working with the community. Love learning with everyone and being a part of something. You know, my friend Bill said the second best thing about Angular is Angular, and the first best thing is the community. And ngconf is a place where we can come together, and I love it. So, I'm also part of the Angular Show. If you've never joined the show, it's a podcast. We release about weekly episodes. Just go to ng.show in your browser, and you can or open your podcasting app and be a part of it. But we do shows on series on testing, series on state management, and a lot of other things that are affecting the community. So join us at NG Show. And my co-hosts are Jennifer Wadella, who's amazing, and Brian Love with Live Love app, who's also fantastic. So head over and check it out. Also, I work with HeroDevs. I work with Scully. I work with XLTS. I know it's a lot of things to do, but Scully is Angular's Jamstack platform. XLTS is extended support for Angular 1X, and HeroDevs is a consulting company where we help some of the biggest companies in the world solve hard problems. So that's where I spend my time. And we're actually looking. So if anyone is like, hey, I'd like to work remote, I'm an Angular expert or a React expert, please reach out to us. Go to hero.dev and click on careers and let us know. So I'm going to take us through Angular 13. We're going to go through the RC0. We're going to talk about some new features, some breaking changes, the dev tools that were released in May, but not a lot of people have heard about. We're going to talk about the roadmap, what's currently in progress, and what's next. And then we're going to do a sneak peek of the RFC. There's a really, really, really popular RFC right now that I'm going to kind of take everyone into. And hopefully you can be a part of that as well. So let's kind of dive in. Cool timing for this conference. RC0 of Angular 13 landed last night, which is rad. So it's officially in the next. So if you want to go ahead and download Angular 13, just head over to your terminal, ng update, Angular CLI, Angular core, and use that -- next flag. And it's going to drop you into, it's going to upgrade your project and run the latest schematics for getting you hoisted up to the latest version, Angular 13. You'll be on the RC0. The cool thing about being on the RC is if you have any issues with your project, the Angular team is very attentive to the feedback from people testing it out in the RC. If you're a year behind and you're going to go to 13 next year, well, the Angular team's moved on to 14 and 15 by then. So now is a really good time to attempt to bugger with the new Angular 13 because the Angular team is very attentive and watching and making sure that things are working. So head over and check it out. My talk is based on the RC, so some of this stuff may change by the time it goes to production. Please don't at me on Twitter and be upset. I'm doing my best. And it's based on the change log. So there's no official release notes. It's just entirely based on the change log from Angular's repo. And if you ever tried to parse a talk out of a change log, it's less easy than it should be. But I've done my best here. And these are also based on conversations I've had with the Angular team. So I'm going to share a bit of stuff I've learned along the way. So let's dive into some of the features for Angular 13. Make sure I'm good on time. Okay. So we're going to talk about some features for forms. We're going to talk about faster builds. There's a language service feature, some stuff going on with the router, TypeScript, IE 11 support, and some testing features. And let me walk through these real quick. So starting with forms, there's two things that I think are worth calling out in forms. There's a new form control status, which is simple. Let's talk about it. And we're also going to talk about some updating validators, functions to update your validators on your form controls. So let me walk through both of these real quick. To start, you got your form control status. So previously on your form control class, you've had status, which is a string, and you've had status changes, which is an observable of a string. And that's fine. But a string, they've typed it now so that on your form control, your status and your status changes actually have to be part of this form control status class, which it looks like this, valid, invalid, pending, or disabled. So we're getting more type safety on forms and statuses and stuff. So I think this is a win. I like to see how these things are implemented. I check out the tests, and I'm going to show you some of the tests from the Angular team. On this one, there were no tests, which I think makes sense. So yeah, there was no tests harmed in the production of this feature. So that's form control status. It's the statuses on your form controls. Now let's talk about updating validators. And there's 4 new methods on them. There's set validator, add validator, remove validators, and has validators. And I'm going to walk us through those real quick. The abstract control class has these actually 8 new functions, because for every set validators, there's also set async validators, because every control has async validators as well. And one thing to note is for set validators, you can pass it a single function, you can pass it a validator function array, or you can pass it null if you just want to wipe out all the current validators and set it back to null. There's add validators where you can add one or many. There's remove validators where you can remove one or many, and then there's a has validator function as well. All those same functions exist for the async validators as well. This is a new piece of the form control that you can start using for more advanced and custom form control. To kind of show you some tests on how this works, if we create a new form control and we pass it a required validator, we can call has validator and pass it the required validator, and we can expect it to return true. If we remove the required validator, then we can expect it to not be there anymore. And when we call has validator, if we add it back in, it's back there again. So this is how these has validators, remove validators, and add validator functions work. This is a piece to show. Also, you can init your form control without any validators. Then you can say, hey, does it have the validator required? No. If I add it, does it have it? Yes. If I remove it, does it not have it anymore? Yes. So this is how I would learn to use this, is by looking at the test. And so that's why I'm showing it here. If you're ever wondering how to use something in Angular, checking out the test is one of the most effective ways. So my talk's going to be heavily leverage that. So let's go on to the next feature, the faster builds. So there's an issue. It solves issue 42562, and it's really interesting what they did here. If a file has no Angular behaviors in it, and I'm not entirely sure what they mean by Angular behaviors, I'm guessing annotations or something Angular-y or importy about Angular, then it doesn't it doesn't store its precompiled set. And so every time that we rebuild and do an incremental build, it has to rediscover that there's nothing in there. So rather than rediscovering those files, having no Angular in them, and reparsing them every time and retranspiling them, it's going to cache those and make that a bit faster. So our rebuilds, our incremental builds, should be quicker. The interesting thing about this feature is there's 19 lines of code added, right? And 4 of them were comments. So there's really only 15 lines of code, and they deleted 5 other lines of code. So it's like net 10 lines of code to get a faster build. And this is what I love about the Angular CLI. Having worked on projects where the Webpack build takes up a third of my year, I love having Angular CLI with these types of enhancements for us all. Let me talk about the language service. So the language service, you can now get auto completion inside your templates for string unions. So if you look over on the left here, you've got this my string union, which is foo or bar. And I have a component that takes input of foo or bar. Now on the right, you can see where I would use this in my editor or in my template to pass in a foo or bar value into that component. Once I start typing foo, it will start to autocomplete in there. It will suggest to me, hey, did you mean foo? If I start typing bar, it would autocomplete to bar. So now it's going to have autocompletion for string union types inside your template. So that'll be really nice for all of us using VS Code or WebStorm, which is what I use, because of the integration with the language services in both of those. All right. And if you want to look at one of the tests for this, in the test, you can see on line 7, it's got the pipe. That's where your cursor is. When they pass in foo, it should mention back to them, are you trying to autocomplete to foo? And the answer is yes. So anyway, that is how the language service was updated. Let me talk about the router. There's some cool stuff. Next feature, router. There's some cool stuff going on in the router. I think it's interesting. In the past, if we look at this test, in the past, if you had 2 question marks in your path, the Angular router would kind of trip over itself and it would drop everything past the second question mark. So if you look at this, based on this test here, we've got path to first. First is equal to ABC with question mark, Baz is true. And then there's a second query parameter of second equals 1, 2, 3. In the past, that second equals 1, 2, 3 would have just gotten dropped as a second query string. And so, but now going forward, it properly handles question marks inside the query strings themselves. So that's a new feature that could be a breaking change potentially, depending on how you're doing things, but keep your eye out for it. There's also new is active change for router link active directive. So you can now subscribe to when your router link becomes active, there's an output on that now. So you can subscribe to that and you can be notified when a link on the page becomes active. You could do something. You wouldn't change the class because that's what the router link active is for, but you could do something else. So anyway, that's a new change as well for the router. In the past, another one is if you put null onto a component as the router link. So if you say router link is equal to a null, it would leave the href on and it would treat the null as an empty string, which the href would just be an empty string. But now in Angular 13, it will remove that href from the router link if you pass in null or undefined. So that's a change that could be breaking, and we'll kind of come back to this in breaking changes section. So this is an important thing to see, and this is the test inside from the Angular code base that tests for this to make sure that it does remove the href on these items, on the router links. All right, let's talk about another feature, TypeScript. So they've bumped TypeScript to v4.2, which is exciting because v4.5 is out. It's officially been released, and maybe by the time Angular 13 goes prod, to general release, it might be up to 4.5. It's currently at 4.4.2. Anything older than 4.4.2 is no longer compatible. So if you have any like custom tools, you'll need to check that out, and we'll revisit this in a second when we go through breaking changes. Also, they've removed IE support in Angular 13, which is really interesting. And that's not in the changelog, but it is a big deal. If you're on a project that supports IE 11, you now get to use this as a reason to the business. Hey, business, we're either stuck on Angular 12 or we have to drop IE 11 support, which is good because Microsoft stopped supporting it. Like, it's a good thing. It's a responsible thing to do. But there's a lot of things you get to take advantage of now, and you need to do some reading. Things like web APIs, web notifications, WebGL, WebRTC. There's a ton of CSS goodies that you can take advantage of now, like CSS variables, Flexbox, Grid. So now that there's no IE 11 support, a lot of us who had to support IE 11, there's a lot of learning we get to do now because we're not handcuffed by that anymore. So let me talk about testing. They've added a thing to make testing more fail-proof. Okay, and rather than talk about it, one of a great leader in the Angular community. I mean, a smart one of the architects in the community that puts out a lot of good content. His name's Lars. He wrote a blog about it last night. So rather than create slides about it, I was like, hey, let's send people over to Lars's blog and learn about the testing module teardown that you can turn on by default in Angular 13. And it makes it so that things get torn down more reliably, so that you have less spillage from one test to another. So go ahead and check out, Google this talk title, Improving Angular Tests by Enabling Angular Testing Module Teardown by Lars, and check out that feature as well. I think it's a big deal. It will make testing easier and more reliable. All right, let's dive into breaking changes. So we've got router link, in-flight navigation changes. There's some service worker changes, node support versions have been bumped, old TypeScript, and we'll talk about load children that's been deprecated as well. So let's get in there. So router link, we talked about this. It removes the href on null. That's a potential breaking change. And so people need to keep their eye out on if their app currently has a null. If you click on it, that may be one. It will have a different behavior now. That may mean that your tests break. That may mean that you have an actual production bug. So you do need to check out or watch for, or just at least have in mind as you do the upgrade. Undefined and null now removes the href from router leaks, and that's an important thing to know. All right. There's this concept of in-flight navigation changes. So if I have a route change happening and another route change starts, that second route change starts. It's called in-flight navigation change. So you're basically clobbering the existing change with a new one, and that's fine to do. I'm not criticizing anyone. A lot of us have a need to do that, but I will say it can cause a flicker in the UI, which can be problematic. But now going forward, it's not going to create a flicker. They're taking that into an account, and so you won't get a flicker on an in-flight route change like this anymore. This is the test that kind of walks you through it. My time is running out, so I'm just going to skip past this. But if you want to check this out, down on the bottom left of my slides, by the way, is the link if you want to get in there and come back and revisit this slide. For service workers, there's a slide update that may break some stuff for you. For active update, for check for update, and for activated, these items, activated is now deprecated for SW update, and then activate, update, and check for update. They used to do promises of void. They now return promises of Boolean, which shouldn't create a bug, but it may break your build at least. So yeah. All right. Breaking change with Node. Node 12.20 is no longer supported. So if your company has a dependency on a legacy version of Node, that's going to conflict with your Angular 13 upgrades. So you're going to need to address that. TypeScript 4.2 is default. Older versions are unsupported. If you have custom tools, plugins, linters, stuff like that, if anything you've built that depends on older versions of TypeScript, you are going to need to potentially refactor some of those into the newer constructs of 4.4.2. All right, and then load children. In load children, you used to be able to say load children and pass it a string that was pointed to, it was a reference to a module. This hasn't been how we mostly do it for the last several years. I think it started 2 years ago, and maybe in Angular 8 or 9, that we stopped passing a string like this, and you actually did the code on line 4 where you actually call import, and you pass it an import function. The string version is no longer allowed. So what you see on line 8, if you have that in your code and you want to go to Angular 13, maybe you put an ignore so that it doesn't fail because you know it works. That's being removed. So you need to update those now if you're going to go to Angular 13. That will be a breaking change now if you haven't already addressed it. All right, DevTools. When I was on Angular 1, Brian Ford was one of my favorite people on earth because he built Battering. And now we have the Angular DevTools again. And there's been a couple attempts at Angular DevTools that were never as good as Battering, but there's now a proper, righteous Angular DevTools that you should go check out. Minko did a blog on it back in May, introducing Angular DevTools. Google it, you'll see it. It's over in the Chrome Web Store. There's tons of users, 100,000 plus downloads. And some of the things that you'll notice when you install it is like you have a new Angular tab inside of the DevTools, which shows you some of that stuff. You can see the entire tree of your component layout inside. And if you click on them over on the right, you can actually see your inputs, your outputs, your properties, and you can actually live edit the values of your inputs or the values of your properties, which is really, really cool. All right. Let's talk about the roadmap. If you want to read the roadmap for Angular, a lot of people aren't aware that it's there. Just go to angular.io/guide/roadmap, and it will show you what they're working on. But these are the things that are currently in progress for them. So for people going, what is the Angular team looking on? They're improving testing times. They're removing IE11 support. They want to make the default compile to language ES 2017. They've got a real focus on building up Angular material as it gains popularity like crazy. They're improving accessibility to be more compliant with the standards. They want to fully implement Ivy and remove View Engine entirely. And then there's an optional NG modules proposal, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. That's what's currently in progress. Coming soon is out-of-the-box micro front-end support, stricter type on forms. I mean, if you go to the Angular repo and you look at the top voted issues, I don't know, over half of them are about types on forms. So stricter types on forms, they got some in 13. I'm sure 14 and 15 will continue to improve on forms. They want to make things simpler for some people who are focused on performance and get rid of zones.js. So they're working on making, they want to work on making, this says in progress, by the way, my slide's wrong. These are the future ones. So optional zone.js is part of what they want to work on. They want to move the Angular compile to just be a TypeScript compile plugin so that it can be faster. Currently, it's not easy to add you can't add host directives to your host element, but they want to make it so that you can from inside of the component. Not from outside, but from inside the component, you should be able to add directives to yourself. And they want to be able to make that happen. And then they're working on the CLI to make code splitting more effective. That's the roadmap. All right. I'm going to walk you through a new thing called standalone components. This is an RFC. All right. RFC means request for comments. The Angular team is asking us to help. Right now is the time to give feedback. They opened it up recently. And if you wanted to go and comment, I think at the end I'll have the URL, but there's a ton of conversation happening and has for the last few days around this standalone component and the RFC around standalone components. I'm going to show you what that might look like. So you can have an idea and you can have an opinion and maybe get involved in the conversation. So yeah, if you just Google standalone components on Angular on GitHub, you'll see this. Lots of people participating. Pavel opened up the issue and there's been a lot of conversations. I want you to imagine if you just wanted to ship a component as a package, but you didn't want to include it in an ng module. So we just want to ship components. We want to make things cleaner. We don't want to have to just create an ng module just so I can ship a component, but I just want to ship the component by itself. So the proposal that they're floating around is standalone true. So if I made a standalone true in my component declaration, this is a standalone shippable ship target that I could ship out and integrate with my Angular app. It would go into its own bundle without the need for an ng module to import it. But if I wanted to import other components, other directives, other pipes, it will have an import section, which Angular components already have an import section. We just don't use them very often. But you could leverage that to bring in your own, like in the template here, it's got a BAS pipe. You could import pipes this way rather than importing them in the module that no longer exists. You can just import them directly in the component. But it would still stand alone, so you could still integrate by putting your app component into. Sorry, if you had a standalone component, rather than declaring it, you would import it like you would a standalone module. So they would be imported differently rather than be declared. They'd be imported because they're standalone. Inside your component, you could import the common module, for example, to use like ng4 or the async pipe. Those are both provided through the common module. If you want, instead of load children for a route, you could say for this route, load the component, standalone component. And that would load the standalone component. So it could integrate directly with the router to create that standalone ship target or entry point. You could dynamically load it by calling import on it and then using the view container ref to create the component and put it into the DOM. Pipes could also be standalone. So you would need to create a module just for a pipe. Directives could be standalone. If you want to read more about this, head over to the discussion happening right now on GitHub. Thanks to the JetBrains team. Organizing conferences right now is brutal. It's hard. And I just want to say thanks to them for focusing on the community, focusing on us during these hard times. If anyone has questions for me, at Aaron Frost on Twitter, my DMs are open. Aaron at hero.dev. And again, don't forget to listen to the Angular show, ng.show, and be part of it.